fourth day of Passover for my Jewish brothers and sisters. Hi, everyone. I hope you see what I wrote. Today is the 75th anniversary of the presidency of Harry Truman. Now, that makes perfect sense because he succeeded Franklin. And as I said yesterday, let me try that again. Harry Truman, of course, succeeded Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was his vice president for only like 80 days when Roosevelt died on April 12th, 1945. And Roosevelt died at 4:35 p.m., and I think it was 7:08 p.m. or thereabouts that Truman took the oath of office. And Truman's most momentous decision, of course, was the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. August 8th was Hiroshima, and then Nagasaki, I think, was 3 days later. So let's talk about all this, especially in the age of a global pandemic, when life, every day here in the New York area, we hear these horrific numbers, 700 people dying, 800 people dying, and we're almost happy that it's plateauing at 700, and these are staggering numbers. And we fear, God forbid, that right now, in the United States, 60,000 or so can die from the coronavirus. If we don't flatten the curve, if people don't continue to practice social distancing, however inconvenient, then the numbers can be, they said, 250,000, God forbid. Hiroshima, however, was 70,000 people in an instant, in an absolute instant. Nagasaki was about the same. But just before then, the United States Air Force had, I should really say the Army Air Corps, the Air Force didn't yet exist. They had flattened Tokyo with thousands of tons of bombs and incendiary bombs. Now, Tokyo at the time was a city that was built mostly of wood, so everything just went up in smoke, and about 80,000 people died. In other words, more people died in the conventional bombing of Tokyo with American B-29 super fortresses than even those who died individually in Hiroshima, 70,000, Nagasaki, about 70,000. Now, I'm not counting the numbers, of course, of people who would later die from the terrible, the radiation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. My wife and I visited Hiroshima, whatever it was, 6-7 years ago. Until today, you're spooked, wondering, is there radiation? I mean, I think there isn't, and I think it's been tested, and of course, tons of people go there. We went there, tourists go there. It's jarring, it's moving, it's jarring. And that was Truman's biggest decision. So let's just go through that. There's a bunch of things I want to talk about today. Truman always justified his dropping of the atomic bomb by saying that 1 million American servicemen, mostly men and some women, but 1 million American servicemen would die in an invasion of the Japanese islands. They know this because of how ferocious the Japanese were fighting in Okinawa and all the islands of the Pacific. And if they would have been fanatical, zealous fighting to protect their emperor and their home islands. So they felt that the atomic bomb, upon which the United States has spent $1 billion at that time during the war, $1 billion. It was going to be used for something, and if it could be used to save a million American lives. And Truman never apologized for it. He never, no matter how much people tried to get him to say that he regretted dropping the atomic bomb. And interestingly, the bomb was dropped, I'm pretty sure, while he was en route back from Potsdam. He was on the high seas, on the Atlantic, and he recorded a video that was aired. It was, and you can see it now on YouTube. And he says that the Japanese attacked us in Pearl Harbor. They've been paid back many times over now with this atomic bomb. We've harnessed the power of the sun to strike back at them. Coupled with that is this book that I'm reading now about Yalta, where Churchill, Roosevelt was still alive. This is February 1945, and Truman, Stalin, Roosevelt all meet. And Stalin complains, and he says, we, the Soviet Red Army, have all this pressure on the East. We're bearing the brunt of the Nazi panzer divisions, the Nazi attacks, and we're dying. You're not doing enough from the West. So the Allies agreed to bomb Dresden at Yalta. Now, why Dresden? Because it was a railway juncture. But when it was finally bombed by 850, just imagine these numbers, 850 Lancaster bombers, British Lancaster bombers, followed by a wave of American bombers during the day. Because remember, during the Second World War, the Americans would do precision bombing during the day and the British would bomb at night. But those were also incendiaries, and 30,000 people died in Dresden at least. And people did not see it as a military target. They saw it as a revenge bombing. And Churchill was asked to apologize for it, and he never did. So again, think about these numbers. As we go through this terrible coronavirus, and may God purge this plague from the earth, and we see these staggering numbers of such horror that we can barely process it. 700 every day, 800 in New York, and then the same thing was happening in Italy and Spain. I think 10,000 people died in the UK. Thank God. I'm so happy to see that Boris Johnson is at Chequers, the prime ministerial country retreat, and he did a video today where he looked pretty good. Looked a little bit, wan, they said, but he sounded good, and thank God he's better. But as we contemplate these numbers, they pale into insignificance by the kind of carnage that was leveled by human beings, and in this case, by the good guys. These are the Allies. The Allies bombed Dresden. The Allies bombed Tokyo. The Allies bombed Hiroshima. The Allies bombed Nagasaki. And none of these dates are getting any kind of real appreciation. This is the 75th anniversary of the death of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. 75th anniversary of the death of the accession of Harry Truman, who dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And yesterday was the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Buchenwald by the American Army. That was April 11th, 1945. Elie Wiesel was liberated that day. Elie Wiesel was liberated 75 years ago yesterday. And these dates, these very important World War II commemorations and Holocaust dates are not getting their due, understandably, because right now we're going through a global pandemic. And we're trying to keep the numbers down. And yet during the Second World War, between 60 and 100 million people died. So painful as it is, and I'd love to see your opinions on all this, painful as it is to say it, I think that Truman had no choice but to use the atomic bomb, even though its horror is also indescribable. Remember, the United States, the most moral country in the world, and the greatest country in the world, is still the only country that ever actually used a nuclear weapon against an enemy. And that was on August 8th, 1945. But there was almost no choice, because the fanaticism of the Japanese soldiers probably would have meant that the American military calculations of about 1 million American soldiers dying in the invasion of Japan would have happened. In other words, this wasn't a reprisal bombing against Nagasaki, even against Hiroshima and Nagasaki, even though they were primarily civilian casualties. They were also military targets, but they were primarily civilian casualties. It wasn't a reprisal bombing, although I'm sure at the time the Americans felt that the Japanese probably deserved it, but it still wasn't a reprisal bombing. It was a bombing to end the war. They knew that if the Japanese saw that city by city is just being eviscerated by atomic weaponry, and they didn't know that America had no more atomic bombs. I mean, they could build another one in probably 2 months, 3 months. So this could have continued. Every 2-3 months, they could have annihilated another Japanese city. And then the Emperor Hirohito, who was himself a war criminal, by the way. It's kind of shocking that he ever got off, but the Americans made the decision under MacArthur that he had to remain, that they needed his authority to rebuild Japan, pacify Japan, whatever the motivation was at the time. But Hirohito decides, look, we can't continue. He does his first ever broadcast to the nation, and the nation offers unconditional surrender to the United States, signed aboard the United States ship, the Missouri, which was chosen by Truman because that was his home state. And that ship is today in Pearl Harbor in the museum, and I've been on it. It's a museum now, and it's quite an incredible place to visit. So there was kind of no choice, and it's horrible to say that. It's horrible to say that, but there probably was no choice. They're probably correct that 1 million Americans would have died. And using the atomic bomb at the time was probably the only way to get the Japanese to accept complete surrender. And that's one of the reasons that the Americans have never apologized for the atomic bomb, even when the 70th anniversary was when President Obama was president. Is that when he went to, remember President Obama went to Hiroshima? Even Obama, who did his world apology tour when he first became president in 2009 about American sins, etc., he never apologized for Hiroshima. Not necessarily because he felt we didn't do anything wrong. Maybe he feels that we did, but because he knows the American people were never going to accept it. We were at war. Now President Trump says that he's a wartime president because Corona is a war. And in many ways he's right. It's a silent enemy. It's a silent killer. We don't know when it's next going to strike. It's an enemy the likes of which we've never really dealt with. Yes, I know about Spanish flu, or God forbid, going all the way back. Spanish flu took 30 million lives. The bubonic plague took 1/3 of humanity, going back to the Middle Ages. But we weren't the ones who lived through that, thank God. And now we're living through something so horrific. And it's not to be believed, what we're going through and what we're experiencing. It's really not to be believed that you can't go to a park. The parks all around us are closed. That if you go to a park, the police will walk over and you'll be lucky if you don't get a summons. They'll hopefully tell you nicely that the park is closed. that you have to wear a mask when you go outside, that people couldn't have a Seder with their children, with their grandchildren. Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel is being criticized for having his son Avner at his own Seder because they said that Avner doesn't live in the prime ministerial residence. There was the edict in Israel was that you couldn't invite your family. And then you have even your children. And then you have President Rivlin, who's being condemned. And he became a widower earlier this year because he had his daughter and his son-in-law and their grandchildren. He's being condemned for that. Now I understand the criticism because you can't be a lawmaker that says the whole nation has to abide by these laws and then not abide by those laws yourself. Okay, I get that. But it just shows you the magnitude of the times. And then there's something that's very painful to me that I find difficult to even discussing, and that is my father's grave illness in the ICU in Los Angeles at Cedar Sinai Hospital, who have done the most amazing job taking care of him. And thank God, to our knowledge, he does not have the coronavirus. I say to our knowledge because he's tested negative twice, but being in the hospital, you never know what you can contract there almost any day, God forbid, even though I thank Cedar Sinai for being so professional and protecting all their patients, because they're the most amazing hospital. And the medical staff there are, as the rest of the world, they're angels of mercy. But my father is very ill, and we can't visit him in the hospital, let alone the dangers of even if we could visit him, the dangers of traveling out there, and we're just living in time. And so I'm having to, with my brothers and sisters, coordinate his health care and making grave life and death decisions with the help of rabbis who we consult and medical experts, of course, who we consult. And it's just so surreal. It's just not to be believed. And all of us are living through this. And all we have are these little screens through which we connect. Tomorrow morning, I have a friend whose daughter's bat mitzvah is going to be on the screen. And then we're all going to sing together, 150 odd participants from different places. And that's as good as it's going to get for now, but it's necessary. And I kind of address myself to all of the pastors today. Thank God there weren't many, but in Kentucky, for example, who decided to have Easter services. I mean, seriously? You really going to take the chance? I mean, are you going to... Here I am debating whether Truman, who decided that he would drop an atomic bomb on people, whether that was a moral decision. But he did it to save life, not to take life. And even the terrible bombings of Dresden and everything else, we can debate them till today, but still the idea was to break the spirit, the morale of the enemy so that the Nazis and the German people would stop fighting, stop annihilating Jews, stop gassing Jews, and stop the war. But here we are, rabbis and priests, imams, pastors. We're supposed to be the angels of mercy. We're supposed to be the ones teaching people about the power of life and being exemplars of promoting life. And people are having Easter Sunday services when you can get your congregants infected. And why? Why go against the advice of the medical professionals? Judaism keeps on insisting on the words of the Bible, Varapa Yarape, that people have to be healed. You have to listen to the doctors. You have to listen to the medical professionals. With my father's healthcare, we have the rabbis telling us what Jewish law is, but of course we're listening to the doctors. We're not going to overrule Jewish law, but we're listening to the doctors, as everyone has to. And I can't understand pastors that are having services right now. How is that serving God? You know, one of the reasons that we break the Sabbath, violate the Sabbath, driving in a car to rush someone to the hospital, for example, even though the Sabbath is the holiest day, the reason why we break the Sabbath or eat on Yom Kippur to save a life is we say that Mechalil in Olav Shabbos Achas Kadeshi Kaim Shabbos Esharbe. It's just simple logic. You desecrate one Sabbath to save a life so that person whose life you save can now keep many Sabbaths. So these parishioners and congregants who are going to Easter services, and I can't believe their pastors are doing this. You're going to have them keep one Easter so that a bunch of your congregants might not keep any other Easters ever, forever, God forbid. That's a sin. You dare not make prayer an abomination. You cannot. People have to stay alive. Right now, they have to stay alive. We have to have fortitude and faith and belief and know that God wants us right now, against all of our instincts, to be together, especially during Christian Holy Week and during Passover. And tonight is the fourth night of Passover. Sorry, tonight's the fifth night of Passover. Let me just work that out. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Fifth night of Passover. And of course we want to be in synagogue. And of course we want to be with our communities and our families. I want to be with my mother from Miami, but I don't want to pose a risk to her, God forbid, so I'm not with my mother. I want to be with my father, but I especially don't want to pose a risk to him. who's in the hospital right now. And all these things are so painful, but we do them in order to promote life. You know, it's a strange thing for us to accept that sometimes in order to promote life, you actually have to distance yourself. Sometimes you have to be absent in order to be present. Sometimes you have to be missed in order to do the right thing. And it's so painful. I can't, again, it's a private thing, so I don't speak a lot about it. But my father's situation, my father's deteriorating health has been a source of such pain and moral confusion and spiritual confusion and psychological torture for me and my siblings, as we discuss this almost every day. And there are children like us going through this all over the world. And you can't even be with the parent. And you're going through this all over the world. And I don't know what God's plan is right now. But I know two things. That A, God wants us to promote life. And if it means that we have to be distant and separated right now in order to save life, then so be it. That this is not a punishment from God. I refuse to accept that. When I see some people saying this is a punishment from God, it's not that I don't believe that we can't be better now. That we can't learn to live better, live cleaner, healthier, holier. Of course we can. Less materialistic, better values. I'm just not going to say, I'm not going to redeem the coronavirus by saying that it's worth it because of all of these great lessons that are coming to us, that are accruing to us, or that the brave new world post-coronavirus is going to be so much better because we learned so much. I'm not going to say that because I'm not going to give this disgusting pandemic any credence, any credibility. It's vile. It's a disease. My hope is that our doctors come along and destroy it and crush it. My hope is that we social distance so much that it has no host and it just dies. Because this virus is a killer. It's a rodef. In Jewish law, we would call it a rodef. It latches onto your cells in order to try to get you to stop breathing and to kill you. And it's disgusting. So I'm not going to find any redemption in it. But that doesn't mean that I will not find vital lessons that accrue to my life and to your life. Not because of the coronavirus, but despite the coronavirus. Despite the coronavirus, we insist on life. Despite the coronavirus, we love God and we attach ourselves to God. Despite the coronavirus, we will do our best to have better values, live less materialistically, less spiritually. Not because of the coronavirus, but despite it. And here's where I come to the death of Jesus and Easter Sunday, the resurrection of Jesus for my Christian brothers and sisters. Obviously a belief that we Jews reject. It's not part of Judaism. It's absolutely antithetical to Judaism. In fact, it's an utter contradiction to Judaism. We don't believe that God is a man. We don't believe that God can die. We don't believe that God can be resurrected because God is not dead. For us Jews, this is blasphemy. My Christian brothers and sisters, I hope you take no umbrage or offense, God forbid, because I deeply respect your faith. It's just that we look at these things very differently. But I respect immensely the Christian faith and the Christian religion. I'm so happy my Christian brothers and sisters celebrate Easter and celebrate Good Friday and celebrate Holy Week. But here's one of the major differences between the two religions. For my Christian brothers and sisters, death can be redemptive. Jesus dies and people are redeemed. Jesus dies and humanity is exonerated of their sin. Jesus dies and humanity is cleansed of their shortcomings. That's not true in Judaism. In our religion, no one has to die in order for there to be redemption. We don't have to have someone die in order for things to go right. We pray to God for the end of death. Bila hamovetz lanetzach. The time will come, the prophet said, when God will swallow death forever. And there will be the resurrection of the dead, not just of Jesus for my Christian brothers and sisters, but of all humanity. The resurrection of the dead is the great promise of the prophet Ezekiel when he saw the valley of the bones. So I don't, and about who killed Jesus, I made it clear yesterday, and I hope you guys watched it, based on my book, Kosher Jesus, that the Jews did not kill Jesus. It was the Romans. And that any statement otherwise, that the Jews killed Jesus, is a lie. It's a blasphemy. And it's a libel that has cost the Jews hundreds of thousands, millions of lives throughout the centuries. And I'm grateful to the Catholic Church, but it took until 1962 to say to exonerate the Jews of the death of Christ, even if people like Mel Gibson still get it wrong and make movies about it. And I discussed that yesterday at great length. The Roman historian Tacitus says that the Romans killed Jesus, not the Jews. And remember that the person who is said to have ordered the death of Jesus, but being pressured by the Jews, was Pontius Pilate. the Roman procurator in the ancient province of Judea, he was a mass murderer killer. The idea that he was the one trying to save Jesus is preposterous. That the Jews are the ones who are so bloodthirsty, and they say, may his blood be upon us and upon our children. A verse in the book of Matthew that is so accusatory that even Mel Gibson, in his movie The Passion of the Christ, which is in Aramaic, decided not to translate that one verse because even he understood that that would be seen as the heart of anti-Semitism. That the Jews are saying, bring upon us, O God, the terrible pain and suffering that we have earned through killing your son Jesus, that even Mel Gibson refused to translate that verse because it's so anti-Semitic and it's so desperately untrue. So, what we have is Harry Truman's 75th anniversary of the accession of Harry Truman, who would decide to drop an atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I've defended that decision, painful as it is to even say that because of how many innocent people died that day. But unfortunately, it was the only way to save 1 million American lives, the approximate number that would have had to invade the Japanese home islands. And Dresden, horrible. But the Nazis had waged war on the entire world. And there was a need to break the morale. And these are horrible things that even the Allies had to do. And that's why I always say there's 3 things in life. There's not just the good and the bad. There's good, the bad, and the necessary. Those are the 3 things in life. Like divorce. I'm a child of divorce. Divorce is never good. It's often bad, but it's sometimes necessary. That's why in Judaism, divorce is allowed. Not just the annulment of marriages like in Catholicism, but actual divorce. But war is never good. It's almost always bad, but it's sometimes necessary. And the Second World War was very necessary. And as we go through all these commemorations of the Second World War, especially now in the month of April, when everything happens, FDR dies, Truman becomes president, Buchenwald is liberated, Bergen-Belsen is liberated. I think, by the way, I'm not sure about Bergen-Belsen, that might have been March, but I'm pretty sure it was also April of 1945. And then April 30th, the end of the month, Hitler, may his name be erased, blows his brains out in his bunker in Berlin. All these commemorations are coming up right now, and that would actually signify that the suicide of Hitler, may his name be erased, the most evil human being that ever lived, if you could even call him a human being, that would finally signify the end of the Holocaust, because only then would the persecution of the Jews really end with the death of the Fuhrer, even as Germany fought on for another week. And all these commemorations are passing us by, and it's very hard to give them their due because we're fighting the coronavirus. And we see just so much death all around us. And we who live in the 21st century, we're so fortunate, thank God. Death was so distant from us. Yes, people still died. There was the 9/11, which took place only about 8 miles from here. And people die of disease. And we know people die of cancer. May God save us. And people who die of diabetes, heart disease. I don't want to go through the names of all the diseases. Yes, but thank God those numbers were individual stories. Of course, 9/11 wasn't, but then thank God the United States largely stopped any other terror attacks on us since then. Even in Israel, thank God, there's been a great decline in the number of terror attacks after Israel built the anti-terror fence. And then suddenly coronavirus hits us, and then death is all around us, and we don't know how to process it. Because we were convinced that the miracles of modern science and miracles of modern medicine would protect us from all that. And now we don't know how to process it, because now our vulnerability has been exposed, our weaknesses have been exposed, the vacuum of leadership has been exposed. And I don't say that as a criticism of President Trump, who I think has done a very strong job. I don't say it as a criticism of Andrew Cuomo, who's done a very strong job. I'm saying the weakness of all of our leaders, because no leaders are equipped to handle this. Some leaders more than others, some leaders better than us, but no leaders were ready for a global pandemic that comes out of the province of Wuhan in China and boom, suddenly goes global and becomes a global catastrophe. None of us could have envisioned this. And it's all of us surrounding us. And all we can do is have faith, have hope. Thank our frontline responders, our nurses, our doctors. And now we see what angels of mercy they are. I have a son-in-law in medical school, and I we're together for Passover. They're staying here, and I say to him all the time, it's amazing, the profession that you chose. How many lives, God willing, you're going to save. And these are tough times, but they require our resilience and our faith. And you know what? It's time that the news also began to highlight the positive stories. And I do see a bit of a shift, like in ABC Evening News, which I watch almost every night at 6:30 p.m. I see a bit of a shift. Before it was just all terrible stories, mass infection, mass death, not enough ventilators, the ICUs overrun, police, doctors, nurses being infected. And that's all true. And you shouldn't bury the truth. We have to confront it, especially to acknowledge the heroism, the sacrifice of those who are saving lives. But finally, they're at least giving us some of the other part of the story, which is the positive news, that there was a flattening of the curve, as Governor Cuomo said here in the New York area. There's a flattening of the curve. The number of hospitalizations is decreasing. I think ICU beds are now beginning to free up, even as the numbers of deaths in the New York area are still 700, 800. The number of deaths in the United States are 2,000 a day. Horrific. But there's still some good news, and we have to highlight that good news. We have to give people a balanced picture so that they have hope, so that they have faith, so that they have fortitude. Thank you all for watching. I wish, I'm looking at some of your comments. Heather says Jesus was killed by the Romans. That's exactly what I wrote in Kosher Jesus. Thank you. I never heard you, Bill Shirley says, never heard you speak before. Thank you, powerful, strong. Well, thank you, Bill. Where were you this whole time? How could you have missed me? Trish is saying that the coronavirus was purposely released by Chinese virologists. I don't know that to be true, and I'm not someone who's into conspiracy theories. If that were proven to be true, beyond the shadow of a doubt, I would accept it. But it has not been proven to be true, and it seems like it came from the wet markets of Wuhan. But there's still culpability on the part of the Chinese, insofar as they have not closed some of these disgusting wet markets yet, where live bats and live this and live that. I mean, the Bible says you have to treat animals with humanity. Ever minachah, you can't eat the flesh of a living animal. And so even if it came from the wet markets, they have to be closed. And the Chinese, I don't think, told us anywhere near enough of what was really happening. And we have to get to the bottom of that. Ted, thank you for your kind words about my father, whom you know. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for your prayers. My father is Yoav ben Eshrat, for those who would like to pray for him. Yoav ben Eshrat. Yoav, the son of Eshrat, my grandmother. To all of you wishing me, my family being safe, I wish the same to you and your families. God willing, you should be safe. God should watch over you. Hello, Dave. Thanks for watching always. And to all my brothers and sisters to the north in Canada. Okay, God bless you all. And to my Christian brothers and sisters, I hope that this Easter has been very meaningful and very spiritually uplifting. To my Jewish brothers and sisters, we have another 4 days of Passover. Make each day count. Eat your matzah. Don't eat bread. Stay away from chametz. We're supposed to have some wine every day, especially on the last 2 days of the festival that are coming up. We're supposed to focus on the Messiah. I'll talk about that tomorrow, God willing. Mashiach, on the last day of Passover. The beautiful Haftorah reading of Isaiah chapter 11, which is all about the Messianic prophecies. The wolf shall lie with the lamb. All the beautiful Messianic prophecies that I wrote about in my book by that title, The Wolf Shall Lie with the Lamb. We'll talk about that tomorrow. God bless you all.